He was exhausted, breathing hard, but he kept his shield up, ready for whatever was coming next. Suddenly, an enemy charged out of the darkness. A powerful kick sent him flying back. The hit was brutal. He gritted his teeth, trying to fight through the pain. His hand was bleeding, but all he could think about was getting back to the lobby. It was his only way out, but he didn't make it. The enemy was too fast, and a blade sliced deep into his leg. The pain was so bad that a system window popped up. He had gained a new skill, pain tolerance. He refused to let this be the end. He wouldn't go down here, not like this. And then he remembered how it all started. Sitting at his desk, surrounded by empty cans, a choice appeared on his screen. Easy, normal, hard, or hell. He collapsed, clutching his leg. The pain was unbelievable, but the system rewarded him for it. His pain tolerance leveled up, and he even got a new skill for resisting bleeding. He was furious, tears streaming down his face. This couldn't be happening. He thought it was over. His vision started to fade. As everything went dark, his mind went back to 2 years ago. He remembered quitting his job as a pro gamer to open a convenience store. Life had become empty and quiet. He used to be at the top of his game. Back then, everyone considered him the best, but that was all in the past now. His life had become unbearably boring. Just empty days and sleepless nights sitting in front of a screen. Suddenly, a breaking news alert flashed on his monitor. He leaned in, wondering what was going on. It wasn't just some small incident. Massive sinkholes were opening up in cities all across the world at the exact same time. Then, a message appeared right in front of him. It was an invitation to something called the tutorial world, and it had his name on it. He couldn't believe his eyes. He reached out, trying to figure out what was happening. The message just stayed there, glowing. For a second, he wondered if this was all just some kind of new game, but then it changed. The invitation was now a choice. Yes or no. He just laughed it off. He figured he must have had too much to drink and was just seeing things. So, without giving it another thought, he reached out and pressed yes. The message changed instantly. It congratulated him by name for being invited to the tutorial world. His smile vanished. This wasn't a hallucination after all. A new screen appeared, this time with difficulty levels. He saw there were 4 of them. A spark of his old self returned. He remembered that there was never a game he couldn't beat. He was Lee Ho-jae, after all. He believed no one could match his gaming skills. But then, a voice from somewhere else screamed out. It was a desperate plea, telling someone to just open their eyes. He opened his eyes. He found himself sitting in a bright white room. He wasn't alone. Other people were there, looking just as lost as he was. One of the men, a guy with blonde hair, immediately started shouting. He angrily demanded to know who everyone was. Spoke up, asking everyone where they were. Spoke up, asking everyone where they were. Spoke up, asking everyone where they were. The blonde man answered. He told them they were in the lobby on the first floor of the tutorial. The others couldn't believe it, demanding to know what he was talking about. Another man, the one in the suit, tried to calm everyone down. He asked if they hadn't all seen the messages before they got here. He asked Ho-jae if a window about a tutorial had popped up for him, specifically mentioning the messages on it. Ho-jae remembered seeing it. He admitted he was too drunk to really understand, but he asked if everyone else came here after reading those messages too. The man in the suit looked annoyed. Ho-jae's attention shifted, and he noticed there were women in the room as well. The man in the suit leaned in, explaining that everyone was just as confused. He pleaded with Ho-jae to share anything he might know. That's when Ho-jae remembered something. He recalled hearing on the news about weird sinkholes appearing all over the world. The blonde man immediately turned to him, questioning what he'd just said. He completely lost it. He shouted that the idea was insane and accused Ho-jae of being out of his mind for thinking they were here because of some holes. Ho-jae quickly tried to take it back, saying it was just a possibility. The man in the suit stepped in, trying to calm the angry man down. Ho-jae finally spoke up, getting the other man's attention. The man in the suit turned, asking what was on his mind. He pointed out something strange. Just a moment ago, he'd been completely drunk, but now he felt perfectly sober. The man wasn't surprised. He explained that in this place, your body just regenerates automatically. Ho-jae was still trying to process everything. The explanation didn't make much sense to him. That's when the man realized something. He pointed out that Ho-jae hadn't even chosen a weapon yet. Just as he said that, a message popped up right in front of Ho-jae. It was time to get his weapon. In an instant, everything changed. He found himself standing in a huge room filled with all kinds of weapons. He was completely shocked. He was suddenly alone. He shouted out, wondering what happened to the people he was just with. Looking around, he saw walls lined with every kind of weapon imaginable. It was a massive armory. He walked through the quiet hall, taking in the sight of all the weapons displayed on pedestals. That's when it finally clicked for him. This was just like the start of every video game he'd ever played. As a former pro gamer, he knew this first choice was critical. His starting weapon could affect his entire future, so he had to be careful. The idea of this all being a game world started to sink in. His confusion was gone, replaced by a sharp focus. It was time to make a choice. He looked around the massive armory, a small smile on his face. This was familiar territory. He was ready to make his choice. He considered his options carefully. A sword and shield, a spear, even a bow. Each one represented a different way to play. He knew this choice would define everything that came next. He started breaking it down like any other game. You had your tanks, your attackers, and your healers. He had to figure out which role he was best suited for. The problem was, he didn't know his own stats. His strength and magic power were a complete mystery. His eyes landed on the bow. It was a weapon for a long-range attacker. It seemed like a safe choice, letting him attack from a distance. But he realized it only worked if you had someone in front to protect you. And right now, He was completely alone. Then a dark thought crossed his mind. What if the enemies weren't monsters? What if he had to fight the other 3 people? In that case, a close combat weapon was the only real choice. He wished he could just ask them what they chose, but his head was still a mess. He couldn't think straight, so the bow was out. It was just too risky, and that's when he remembered the most important detail of all. The difficulty he had chosen was Hell. On Hell difficulty, survival was the only thing that mattered. There was only one choice that made sense. He grabbed a sword and a shield. It was the most basic, balanced combination there was. A window popped up, giving him the details. The system explained that his new shield was a dirty, used item with terrible defense, worth less than a cheap belt. His face fell. He realized both his sword and shield were complete trash. He glanced at the other weapons, a flimsy bow that looked like it would snap, and an old, rusty axe. Turns out, every single choice was just as bad as his. A window popped up right in front of him. The system was asking if he was sure about his choice. He hesitated for a second. He was about to start on the hardest difficulty with gear that was basically garbage, but there was no other way. He took a deep breath and confirmed his decision. In a flash, he was back in the White Room. The other 3 people were there, looking at him. The man in the suit smiled and welcomed him back. Hojay was shocked to be in the exact same place he'd just left. The man noticed the sword and shield in his hands. He told Hojay that since he'd made his choice, it was time to explain how the system windows worked. Nearby, the blonde man stretched his arms, looking like he was getting tired of waiting around. The blonde man was completely out of patience. He complained loudly about all the waiting, suggesting they should just leave Hojay behind. He turned on Hojay, getting right in his face. He threatened to show him what his weapon could do, accusing him of looking down on him. But the man in the suit stepped in to stop it. He smiled and suggested that it would be better for everyone if they just helped each other out. The blonde man grumbled, but agreed. Hojay thanked the man for his help, then asked what he meant earlier when he said there were only 4 of them. He wanted to know how the man could be so sure about that. The man in the suit just smiled. He told Hojay it was a good question and that he would explain it slowly. He said the answer was simple: the system windows. To prove it, he was going to give them a demonstration. In an instant, a glowing screen appeared right in front of him. Hojay could only stare, completely stunned. The man in the suit smiled and told Hojay to try it himself. Hojay focused, thinking the word inventory in his head. And just like that, a screen popped up right in front of him. He watched it load, completely amazed. He just stared, taking it all in. When it finished loading, a huge grin spread across his face. Told him to open the status window. He told him to open the status window. He pointed right at the button on the screen. A new window opened, showing all of his stats. His strength was 8, agility 13, and stamina was 10. His magic power was a little higher at 21. But looking at the numbers, Hojay thought they were pretty shabby. The man in the suit told him there was one more thing to check out. He pointed to the community tab on the screen. He explained that this was where he could talk to other people in the tutorial. As the window loaded, the man mentioned that this lobby was only for people who chose the Hell difficulty. Hojay looked around the massive hall. The man was right. There were only 4 people here. The man in the suit just gave a weak, forced smile. The blonde man glared, clearly not happy about the news. The woman just watched everyone silently, her expression unreadable. Hojay's eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. Out of everyone who entered the tutorial, only 4 people had picked Hell difficulty. This was it. This was everyone. The man in the suit seemed thrilled by this. The blonde guy, however, was clearly pissed off. He kept explaining the system's features, pointing out that there was also a clock. Hojay followed his instructions, swiping his hand through the air. A timer popped up. They had a little under 3 days before the tutorial began. He looked over the interface again, the inventory, the status window. It was all exactly like an RPG. His stats were pretty low, except for his magic power, which was surprisingly high. He looked back at the other 3 people in the room. It was all starting to make sense. The man in the suit was already talking to the other 2, trying to get them organized. Hojay watched them. If this was a game, then these people were his teammates. He knew he had to learn more about them, and fast. The man in the suit suggested they all introduce themselves to build some trust. Seeing his chance, Hojay decided to go first, putting on a confident smile. But the man in the suit jumped in, saying he would start. He told them he was athletic and good with physical work. The blonde guy cut him off. He introduced himself as Jo Kyung Min, then immediately asked why they were even bothering with this. He crouched down and mocked the man in the suit, asking if he thought he was some kind of school principal for talking about cooperation. That's when Hojay spoke up. He told them his specialty was gaming, and that he was a former pro gamer. Hearing that, Jo Kyung Min's entire attitude flipped. He grabbed Hojay, excitedly asking if he played a famous game called Magic of Online. Hojay looked a little overwhelmed and explained that he played a different type of game. But Jo Kyung Min didn't care. He was just thrilled to meet someone who understood. Hojay told him he'd played that game before, a long time ago. This was all it took for them to become instant friends. The man in the suit tried to get everyone's attention again, but he was cut off by a woman who jumped between them. She yelled out her name was Park Soo-ha, and that she was a huge fan of animations. Her voice was so loud, it made everyone wince. The man in the suit cleared his throat, trying to get things back on track. He figured if this really was a game, it was most likely RPG. Hojay picked up on that idea. He added that since there were multiple people here, Jo Kyung Min shouted out in agreement. He'd been thinking the exact same thing. It meant they were in a multiplayer game with different roles and classes. This was a world he understood. Hojay was finally in his element. He suggested they all show their weapons to figure out their roles. just like in a game. The man in the suit was on board. He pulled out a weapon that looked like a big trident. Jo Kyung-min grinned and showed off the huge axe he'd picked. For a moment, it felt like they were actually becoming a team. That's when Ho-jae's face fell. He realized they were all close-range fighters. He turned and asked what weapon Park Soo-ha had, hoping she was different. She spoke up, saying she was fine with anything, as long as it was a ranged weapon, like a bow. Then she pulled out a sword. The men just stared, completely stunned. Their perfect party was made up of 4 close-range fighters. This was going to be a problem. They couldn't believe it. He yelled that with everyone using close-range weapons, their team balance was complete garbage. The man in the suit, Min-sik, seemed lost. He asked what a tutorial even was, remembering they said it starts in 3 days. Kyung-min looked at him like he was crazy for not knowing. Kyung-min explained that it was just a stage to learn the controls. Ho-jae nodded, confirming he was right. But Soo-ha just turned away, saying she didn't want to. Kyung-min was furious, demanding to know who she was to refuse. Ho-jae was lost in thought. They only had 3 days. That's when he got an idea. He suggested that for the next 3 days, they should all train together with planned roles to prepare. Kyung-min just scoffed at the idea. He asked why they would bother training for a tutorial he thought would be incredibly easy, but Ho-jae pushed back. He warned him that even for a tutorial, the difficulty can be completely different from game to game. An enemy attacked them from a distance. He was at a huge disadvantage. If an enemy attacked them from a distance, he warned, they'd be wiped out immediately. The image of them getting completely destroyed flashed through their minds. They finally understood the problem. That's when he started giving out roles. He said that with his sword and shield, he could be on the front line, able to both attack and defend. Kyung-min's eyes lit up. He was starting to get it. He got totally pumped, yelling that he was ready for a fight. Ho-jae then turned to Min-sik. He pointed out that the trident had the longest reach of all their weapons. He told him to protect everyone from the back line. Min-sik looked proud to have such an important role. For the first time, they actually felt like a team, all thanks to the pro gamer. Just when it felt like they were finally a team, Soo-ha spoke up. She wanted to know what her role was. Ho-jae thought for a moment. He told her she could be a rear guard. She just stared back at him, repeating the word. She wasn't having it. She argued that her sword was just as long as Min-sik's trident, so she should have the same role as him. She declared that she was confident in her skills. Ho-jae tried to explain that it wasn't about that. He was just putting her in the back because it was the safest spot. But she completely twisted his words. She accused him of discriminating against her just because she was a girl and said she was confident in her fighting ability. Ho-jae was completely flustered. He tried to tell her that wasn't it at all. The real problem, he said, was that her katana was way too long, almost like something out of a comic book. He told her it wasn't a weapon she could just swing around with one hand. He didn't see it as real fighting power. That's when Min-sik stepped in, trying to keep the peace. He told Soo-ha that he understood her feelings, but that she should really follow Ho-jae's suggestion. He reminded her that they were on hell difficulty and had no idea what was coming. For everyone's safety, he argued, listening to the pro gamer was their best bet. Soo-ha let out a sigh. She finally admitted that he had a point. With that settled, she raised her sword high and started practicing. She shouted out the name of a skill like she was in an anime. Her swing was so wild that she ended up smacking Min-sik right across the face. Ho-jae and Kyung-min just watched from a distance, totally confused by what was happening. Kyung-min finally snapped. He yelled at her to stop screaming every time she attacked, telling her it just sounded weird. But she just argued back that you're supposed to chant the skill's name to use it. Min-sik, trying to keep up, awkwardly started doing the same with his trident, completely ignoring Kyung-min's complaint. Min-sik was losing his patience. He tried to argue with Soo-ha about her technique, telling her she was using the wrong words for a katana, but that wasn't really what he was angry about. Ho-jae just looked on, completely exhausted by the nonsense. He pleaded for everyone to just listen to him for a second. And then, in the middle of all the noise, something clicked. He explained that in this lobby, it wasn't just their health and injuries that recovered. Kyung-min caught on immediately. Even their damaged weapons and armor were being restored. Ho-jae realized this changed everything, because the lobby kept them in perfect condition. It was the best place they could possibly have for training. He thought about all the RPGs he'd played. Usually you'd respawn in a safe village after a fight. With a plan forming in his mind, Ho-jae decided to take charge. He called Kyung-min over to get started. Kyung-min had finally had enough. He grabbed his axe and yelled that he was going to teach the other guy a lesson. He sneered, telling his opponent to get ready for a funeral. Soo-ha just watched, sarcastically telling him he was doing a great job. As the two of them started going at it, Soo-ha sighed. She pointed out that it didn't really matter who was in charge if they were just going to fight anyway. Ho-jae wasn't surprised. He leaned against a pillar and explained that in games, players fight over silly things like this all the time. He broke it down for her. If Min-sik was the leader, the team would be all defense. But if Kyung-min was in charge, they do nothing but attack. Soo-ha looked up at him with a small smile. She admitted that she'd actually been thinking of him as their leader. Ho-jae was completely caught off guard by that. After a moment, he just told her she seemed pretty mature for her age. Soo-ha told him he was smart and shared that her parents had a condition. If she failed her college exams, she couldn't become a pro gamer. Then she looked at him and said that being a pro gamer didn't seem to last long anyway. She looked right at him and asked a simple question. Why did he quit? Ho-jae started to answer, but he didn't get the chance. The quiet moment was shattered by Kyung-min yelling at Min-sik again. He complained that the long weapon was cheating and demanded they swap. Min-sik just smirked, saying it was all about how you use it. Instead of getting annoyed, Soo-ha just leaned against Ho-jae's leg, looking up at him with a small smile. She joked that it was a shame they didn't have popcorn and a drink to watch the show. Ho-jae let out a small laugh. He agreed with her completely. Suddenly, a blue window popped up in front of everyone. The first round of the tutorial was starting in 10 seconds. The time for talking was over. Ho-jae stood at the front, his expression serious. This was it. The tutorial was finally starting. Kyung-min grinned, saying he'd never put so much effort into anything in his entire life. Min-sik also had a confident smile on his face. Soo-ha looked on with a quiet, determined expression. The system's voice echoed around them, announcing that the first round would start shortly. Another message appeared, explaining that a portal to the tutorial stage was being generated. Suddenly, a ring of bright green light erupted from the ground, surrounding all four of them. They stared in disbelief. It was a real portal, right in front of them. As the portal swirled around them, Ho-jae's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe what he was reading. The message was clear. This tutorial was single player only. They had spent all that time training as a team, figuring out their roles. It was all a complete waste. But then, Min-sik started to smile. He actually laughed out loud. Kyung-min just glared, furious at the whole situation. A new message appeared. The portal was about to activate. The green energy around Ho-jae grew stronger. The light began to break apart into glowing particles, swirling around them and pulling them in different directions. He raised his arm to shield his face as the light became too bright to look at. This was it. He was going in alone. As the green light pulled them apart, Ho-jae yelled out that for the first time in a while, he actually enjoyed being in a party. The others shouted back, agreeing and wishing each other well before they disappeared. But once they were gone, his friendly expression vanished. He was alone now, and he braced himself for whatever came next. The light grew brighter, completely surrounding him. A message appeared, telling him the portal was active. The time for waiting was over. He landed hard in a dark, narrow alleyway. Behind him, the glowing green portal was the only thing lighting up the darkness. He looked down the path ahead. A message floated in the air, welcoming him to the tutorial. In his hands were the only things he had, a simple sword and a wooden shield. The green portal behind him flickered and then vanished, leaving him in total darkness, except for a few dim lights on the walls. A small, confident smile spread across his face. He knew the real game was finally starting. The alley stretched out into the darkness. It was completely silent. He moved carefully along the wall, peeking around the corner. His expression was serious, but there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. He broke into a run, charging down the narrow path. A huge grin spread across his face. He admitted to himself that he was actually getting goosebumps. This was the thrill he'd been missing, but he quickly forced the excitement down. He told himself to stay calm and focused. He stopped at the end of the alley, his heart pounding. He stood there for a moment, waiting for whatever was hiding in the shadows. He froze. Something made him stop in his tracks. He turned around and saw the glowing green portal was still there. He couldn't figure out why it hadn't closed yet. That's when a message box appeared right in the middle of it. The system asked if he wanted to go back to the first floor lobby. Ho-jae was surprised. He realized he could just leave the fight and go back anytime he wanted. He almost laughed at how nice that seemed. He stood there for a second, looking at the glowing exit, but he had no plans to turn back. He reached out and chose to move forward to the first floor. The green light pulled him through the portal. He stumbled into a massive, bright white room lined with huge pillars. He was genuinely impressed. He looked around the massive hall. Just as he expected, he was completely alone. He let out a sigh of relief. He'd only been in the tutorial for a minute, but he'd already learned a lot. He now knew he could come back to this lobby anytime. But as he looked at a new message screen, he realized there was a catch. The system was telling him to enter the next stage. He had just under 24 hours to do it. Now he needed to test something else, the auto-regeneration. Without hesitating, he sliced his own hand on his sword. The wound closed up almost instantly. The healing was working. A smile spread across his face. This changed everything. No matter how bad things got, he could always come back here and heal up completely. He had a perfect safe zone. The system's timer was still ticking down. Soo-ha pointed out that it didn't look like the others were coming back. Another member of their group seemed to agree. Ho-jae pulled up the community board to check. The number of members for each difficulty was the same. At least he knew they were still alive. Soo-ha said the timer was making her nervous and suggested they get going. Ho-jae agreed. As the green light of the portal swirled around them, she called out his name. She told him she had a favor to ask. She wanted him to teach her how to play games when they got back, so they could play together. She leaned in close, her face just inches. She leaned in close, her face just inches. She leaned in close, her face just inches from his, and then she kissed him on the cheek. Ho-jae was so flustered he didn't know how to react. With a smile, she told him that when they got back, she wanted to get to know him better. Before he could say a word, she said her goodbyes. Ho-jae was just left staring, completely stunned. He watched as the green light swirled around her, pulling her into the portal. The particles of light flew through the darkness, carrying him to the tutorial stage. He landed in a long, quiet corridor made of stone. He was all alone now. He took a deep breath to steady his nerves. He pulled up his status window, one last time. His stats were pretty average, nothing special. He stood there, thinking about everything he didn't know yet. The portal, the timer. It was a lot to take in. He was a little worried about not having any health bars, but he figured he'd be fine as long as he could dodge the worst attacks. With a confident grin, he decided he was done thinking. It was time to go. He raised his shield and charged straight into the darkness. As he ran, something clicked in his head. His status said human, which meant there had to be other races in this world. That would make it easier to guess what kind of enemies he'd be up against. He clenched his jaw, a bead of sweat running down his face. He was ready for a fight and dared anything to come at him. He stood in the dark alley, sword and shield ready, but nothing happened. After more than 30 minutes of complete silence, his patience wore thin. He yelled out, asking the moderator if the whole thing was broken, but he immediately shook his head, forcing himself to stay alert. He couldn't afford to let his guard down for a second. He reminded himself that his concentration as a pro gamer was second to none. That's when a system window suddenly appeared right in front of his face. He just stared, completely stunned. The window showed he had just acquired 2 new skills, battle focus and determination. He looked closer and saw they were both passive skills. Battle focus would help him concentrate longer, and determination would increase his resolve. He knew exactly what that meant from his gaming days. Unlike active skills you have to use, passive skills are always working in the background once you learn them. He realized that skills were created when certain conditions were met. Both battle focus and determination were directly related to what he'd just been doing, waiting and staying focused. A smile spread across his face. If his theory was right, then the key to getting stronger was to experience as many different things as he could. He immediately thought about telling the others. He figured he could post the information on the community bulletin board for them to see, but just as he was about to open it, he felt something. Down the dark alley, a strange presence appeared. A powerful aura washed over him, and he immediately tensed up. He cautiously moved forward, trying to figure out what it was. The pressure was intense, unlike anything he'd ever felt before. Whatever it was coming from the end of the alley, and it was coming for him. Hojay held his shield up, his heart pounding. He tried to stay quiet as he peeked down the alley. The entire alley was filled with a dark, heavy energy. Whatever was down there, it was waiting for him. He gritted his teeth. Fear was there, but so was resolve. He wasn't about to run away. That's when a small, star-like light appeared at the far end of the passage. In an instant, it shot forward. A huge, dark slash of energy slammed into the ground right in front of him, tearing into his arm. Pain was real. His first thought was to run, to get back to the lobby where it was safe. But another slash of energy slammed down right where he was standing. He looked down and saw an arrow sticking out of his shield. He couldn't believe it. He threw himself to the ground, barely blocking another attack with his shield. That's when he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. An arrow had gone right through. More arrows found their mark, and he collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony. He was in so much pain, he could barely think. And then, a system window popped up. He had acquired a new skill, pain tolerance. The reality of the situation hit him hard. This wasn't a game. The pain was real. And if the pain was real, what would happen if he died here? Even as he was getting torn apart, more system windows appeared. His pain tolerance skill leveled up, and he even got a new one, hemorrhage resistance. The system was basically rewarding him for getting completely destroyed. Slammed right into his chest. He slammed right into his chest. He collapsed, barely able to move. Lying there in the dark alley, he knew he was going to die if this kept up. That's when a new idea hit him. Maybe it would be better to just die here once and start the whole thing over. He realized there was only one way out. He would just have to die and start the whole thing over. As his vision started to fade, he saw faces from his past looking down on him. His body was giving out. He was just moments away from the end. But then, a new skill appeared, faintness resistance. His plan to simply pass out and die wasn't going to work. Something inside him refused to accept it. He wasn't going to let it end like this. He thought about everyone he left behind, and the promises he still had to keep. That sudden surge of determination was enough. The system rewarded him instantly, leveling up his battle focus. He remembered her smile. He had to survive. He had to get back. Lying on the ground, bleeding and broken, Hojay found a new resolve. He wasn't going to give up. Another weapon was driven deeper into his body. He grunted, the pain almost too much to handle. As he screamed in his mind that he couldn't die, the system reacted. His bleeding resistance and pain tolerance both leveled up. Something changed in his eyes. The pain was fueling him now, with an arrow sticking out of his back. He forced himself to his feet. He swore he would beat this, no matter what. Suddenly, a strange green circle of light appeared right in front of him. Just then, another arrow came flying straight for his head. He had to warn the others. As the arrow flew towards him, he tried to open the community board, but the system was still loading. As the arrow flew towards him, he tried to open the community board, but the system was still loading. Community board finally opened, but it wasn't what he expected at all. He stared at the list, completely confused. He looked closer at the numbers next to each difficulty. Easy, normal, hard. They all showed that people had died. A lot of them. The horrible truth hit him all at once. He couldn't believe it. He wondered if all 3 of them were really gone. He grabbed his head, his heart pounding. There was just no way. He saw their faces in his mind. Suha, Kyungmin, and Minshik. His mind screamed in denial. It had to be a lie. The shock was too much for his battered body. He leaned against the pillar and was sick, but as the sickness passed, cold logic took over. He knew it was true. Minshik and Kyungmin didn't even know about the waiting room, and Suha, with her skills, there was no way she could have escaped a trap like that. He clenched his fist, thinking of them. Suha, Kyungmin, Minshik. He slammed his fist against the pillar, screaming. He just couldn't accept that they were really gone. The empty waiting room was completely silent. With his anger spent, he slumped over, exhausted. He needed to focus, so he pulled up his status window. The system showed his stats. His agility was now 13, and his strength was 11. He'd also gained a whole list of new skills. He looked over the new skills. Pain tolerance, faint resistance, bleeding resistance. They were all passive abilities, designed to help him survive. Then he saw the timer. He had just over 19 hours before he had to go back in. He sat there, covered in blood and dirt. He knew what he had to do. For their sakes, he had to be the one to survive. His eyes burned with a new fire. He swore he would pass this tutorial, no matter what. When the timer ran out, a portal opened. He stepped back into the first stage, but this time, he wasn't running. He sat calmly, waiting. He stood up and looked into the darkness, expecting the first arrow to fly out any second. He noticed the blood stains from before were gone. The stage had reset completely, just like a video game. And if it was like a game, there had to be a pattern to the attacks. He just had to figure it out. Right on cue, something shot out from the end of the alley. It was an arrow flying straight for his shield, which he had propped up as a decoy. He watched the darkness, waiting. Just as he expected, an arrow came flying out. His whole plan depended on this. He needed to know where the first shot would land. The arrow shot straight for his right ankle. He was ready for it. He was right. A huge grin spread across his face. This confirmed everything. The attacks weren't random. They followed a clear pattern. Now, he just had to figure out what came next. The second arrow slammed right into the shield he'd left behind. But then a third arrow came from a different direction, hitting him square in the gut. He hit the ground hard, gasping in pain. Lying there in pain, he finally understood the sequence. After the chest, the next target was always the same. It was the forehead. Every single time, the final shot was aimed right between the eyes. But this time, it wasn't an arrow. A ball of glowing energy came flying down the alley. It didn't matter. He knew where it was going. He raised his shield, absolutely certain he could block this. The energy slammed into the shield and shattered it instantly. His only defense was gone. He knew this was bad. He had miscalculated completely. The blast hit him with full force. The pain was overwhelming. He knew what he had to do, but his body wouldn't listen. He collapsed to the ground, the wound in his chest burning. He had to get back to the portal. It was his only chance to recover. Just then, another blast of light shot down the alley. Lying there, helpless, he thought this was the end. But right at that moment, a system window appeared. He had leveled up. To see another attack flying straight for him, he instinctively blocked the next arrow with his sword. Looking down, he saw the arrow in his chest was gone, and his shield was perfectly restored. Then, everything went quiet. The attacks just stopped. He stood there in the empty alley, wondering what was going on. There was only one thing to do in a situation like this. He pulled up his status window. The system showed he was now level 1. His pain tolerance had even jumped to level 4. It finally clicked. He must have been level 0 this whole time. He was now level 1. His pain tolerance had even jumped to level 4. It finally clicked. He must have been level 0 this whole time. He realized that the moment he leveled up, his body recovered completely, just like it did in the waiting room. This meant he now had 2 ways to fully heal, returning to the waiting room or leveling up. A plan started to form in his mind. Whether he got hit, escaped, or blocked an arrow, it all gave him experience points. He had an idea. He could run the trap, escape to the waiting room to reset the dungeon, and then do it all over again. He could farm this trap for as much experience as he wanted. He knew the idea was crazy. Deliberately getting hit to gain experience was risking his life every single time. No one in their right mind would do this, but he wasn't in his right mind anymore. He was in hell difficulty, and leveling up would definitely make him stronger. A grin spread across his face. He decided it was a great plan. With his sword and shield ready, he was prepared to give it everything he had. So he turned around and walked right back into the alleyway. He was completely exhausted, covered in cuts and blood, but he'd finally done it. A system window popped up, confirming his pain tolerance had reached level 4. But even with the new skill, the pain was still terrible. He collapsed, cursing that the tolerance didn't actually stop it from hurting. He knew he still had a long way to go. This was his new routine. Get hit, recover, and gain experience points. He'd been doing this for 28 days straight. It was a crazy, brutal method, but he was convinced it was the fastest way to get stronger. Day after day, he ran through the same empty alley. Each time, he'd get hit by the arrows, then escape to the waiting room to heal, and do it all over again. He ran back into the alley. Another arrow of light shot straight for him. 2 more followed right behind it, coming in fast. But after nearly a month of this, he wasn't just taking the hits anymore. He was ready for them. He knocked one away with his sword and blocked the other with his shield. He was getting faster. He pushed off the ground, dodging and weaving through the volley of attacks. All that running had paid off. A new skill bar had appeared in his vision. The system showed he'd unlocked sprint, and his perception enhancement was now level 3. His crazy plan was actually working. With a final burst of speed, he made it to the end and escaped through the portal once more. He didn't even hesitate. After healing up, he turned right around and charged back into the alley for another round. He knew exactly what was waiting for him down the corridor. But he wasn't just running anymore. He was fighting back. He deflected the arrow perfectly. A wild grin spread across his face. This wasn't a chore anymore. It was a game. He moved through the volley of arrows, daring the trap to send the next wave. He knocked every single one of them aside without breaking a sweat. He was shouting with pure excitement, completely lost in the thrill of it all. And then, silence. The trap was done. All he had to do was go back and start all over again. He'd been at this for 28 days straight. All those close calls and endless runs had paid off, giving him new skills and raising his level. But that one message still bothered him. He couldn't figure out who this god of adventure was, or why they were watching him. He looked at his inventory, still amazed at what his body could do now. Running for 15 hours straight without a break, this was the power of leveling up. But all that grinding didn't change one simple fact. He was running out of time. A few days ago, he'd seen a post on the community board. Turns out, there was a 30-day time limit to clear the first floor. He had no idea what the penalty was for failing, but it didn't matter. He had to clear this floor in the next 2 days. The problem was, he still didn't know what was waiting for him at the end of this trap. He hadn't even memorized all the arrow patterns yet. To make things worse, his buff and night vision skills were useless in here. All he had left to rely on was his sword and shield. He decided he wouldn't rely on special skills. He'd trust his own body and instincts to get through this. He took off, sprinting down the alley as fast as he could. He pushed himself harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He ignored the pain, his eyes locked on the path ahead. That's when the arrows started flying. They came from everywhere, aimed right at him. He didn't slow down. He just kept moving, dodging, and weaving through the storm of arrows. The impacts were deafening. Arrows slammed into his shield, the force nearly knocking him off his feet. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, using every bit of strength he had to block the shots. He kept running, pushing through the darkness. An arrow slammed into him, and he grunted from the impact. But the pain was exactly what he wanted. A grin spread across his face. His pain tolerance was already at level 8. He told himself this was nothing and charged forward, letting the arrows hit. That's when he saw it, a bright light at the end of the alley. It had to be the exit. He poured on the speed, making a final dash for it. But just as he got close, another arrow pierced his shoulder. The pain was intense, and he gritted his teeth, trying to fight through it. He stumbled out of the dark alley and into the bright light. He fell to the ground, arrows still sticking out of his back. Before him was a huge room with a glowing circle in the middle. The place was enormous, with tall pillars and a cracked floor. He was completely alone. But then, something strange started to happen. His body began to dissolve into black dust. A moment later, he reformed on the other side of the room, looking completely confused. He had no idea what just happened. He looked back at the glowing circle. It wasn't an exit. It was a teleporter. He was completely worn out. This hell difficulty was no joke. He was lying on the ground, and a warm, glowing light started to spread all around him. He sat up and looked at his hands. The arrow wounds, the cuts, they were all gone. He felt a wave of relief, realizing he'd been saved. Then he remembered. This had to be the fountain of recovery he'd read about on the bulletin board. He recalled the chat logs. Other players had mentioned that there was a place that healed you right before the boss room. He put it all together. If the healing fountain was here, then that massive red door up ahead could only be one thing. He started walking towards it. After everything he'd been through, he was finally at the end. A message appeared in front of the door. The system asked if he was ready to challenge. Lee Hojae didn't even have to think about it. He yelled that of course he was ready. This was the whole reason he'd suffered to get here. With his answer, the massive doors began to grind open. The room was a nightmare. Everything was broken and on fire. He gripped his shield, ready for whatever was inside. He realized this had to be the boss room. It was a huge space, with a river of lava flowing right through the middle. He held his shield tight, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. That's when he saw it, on a platform across the lava. It wasn't a monster. It was a giant crossbow, aimed right at him. Before he could even react, a massive bolt of light shot past him. He pushed himself up, grabbing his sword. So this was the boss. It wasn't going to be easy. He stared at the giant weapon across the room, wondering if destroying it was really the only way to clear the floor. But the crossbow didn't give him time to think. It was already loading another glowing arrow. Another one fired. He gritted his teeth, getting more and more frustrated. That's when he realized the real problem. The crossbow was on the other side of a river of lava. It felt like the game was daring him to jump, but instead of fear, a slow, determined grin spread across his face. He wasn't about to give up. He broke into a sprint, charging straight for the lava. As he ran, he realized the crossbow wasn't the only trap. Spears started raining down from the ceiling. He grunted, blocking them with his shield as he kept moving forward. One of the spears nearly got him. He realized his perception enhancement skill was the only reason he was still alive. With his current stats, he felt like this was actually doable. He just had to push through. But then, another trap triggered. His entire body was suddenly engulfed in flames. He screamed in agony. Even through the pain, he saw the system message. He had just gained burn resistance. That's when he saw it. A path of light was forming across the lava. The fire was still burning him alive, but he didn't care. He locked his eyes on the other side. He pushed forward, using his shield to block whatever was coming at him. He gritted his teeth, the fire searing his skin. Suddenly, flaming arrows slammed into his back, adding to the agony. He let out a scream of pure frustration. Somehow, he stumbled to the other side and collapsed onto the stone floor, the flames finally dying out. He gasped for air, his body screaming in protest. But then, he heard a noise from above. He looked up and saw the entire trap mechanism resetting. He was right back at the beginning. He knew it then. There was no way he was clearing this trap. As he sat there, beaten and brutal, his mind started to drift back to his old life. He thought about the one thing that had always defined him. He remembered telling everyone that he only lived to play games. It wasn't because he was bored. He played because he genuinely loved it. That passion became the only thing he had. It was his pride, his honor, everything. But then, in an instant, it was all gone, and all that was left was a boring, pointless life. But he realized that now, things were different. He was in constant pain, and he was exhausted, but he wasn't empty anymore. Every time a new skill popped up, his heart would start racing. It was a feeling he hadn't had in a long, long time. But that didn't stop the frustration. He remembered getting caught in a fire trap, furious at himself for making the same mistake twice. He remembered the axe trap, too. One wrong step, and it was over. He'd run through these traps again and again, and after all that, he could only come to one conclusion. This tutorial was just way too hard, but he wasn't going to just run anymore. If he couldn't get past the trap, he would just have to break it. He charged right at the source of the arrows. He deflected the shots with his blade, closing the distance. With a final roar, he swung his sword with everything he had, convinced this would be the final blow. He felt the impact connect. The arrow trap shattered into pieces. Lee Ho-jae stood there, completely spent, just trying to catch his breath. He was beaten up and bleeding, but a huge, crazy grin spread across his face. He'd done it. Then the message appeared. The system confirmed it. He had cleared the first floor on hell difficulty. He started laughing, but it was a broken sound, full of pain and relief. Through his tears, he apologized for being the only one to make it out. He clenched his fist, thinking of the names of those he'd lost. Kyung Min, Min Shik, Su Ah, they were all gone. With his fist raised high, he let out a defiant roar. He had cleared the first floor. The system immediately flooded him with rewards. He got a ton of points. All his injuries were healed, and he even got a new skill called Protection of the Wind Spirit. But as he looked everything over, something felt off. He had cleared the first floor, but his level hadn't gone up at all. He checked the new skill. It just gave him a small boost to his agility. It was useful, but it felt like a small prize for surviving hell. That's when a green portal opened up right in front of him. The system's message was simple. Continue. He hesitated, trying to figure out where it led. Was it straight to the second floor or to some kind of waiting room? But he knew standing around wouldn't do any good. There was no other choice but to keep moving forward. He took a deep breath and walked toward the light. He stepped through, ready for whatever came next. But he didn't find another dungeon. He was standing in a peaceful, green field under a clear sky, and in the distance, someone was waiting for him. A small girl with long white rabbit ears. He looked around, confused. This wasn't a waiting room, so was it the second floor? Then he saw someone standing on a hill. A person. Another player? But as he got a better look, he realized she had actual bunny ears. She turned around in a flash. She smiled brightly and introduced herself as Kiri Kiri. Ho-jae was completely thrown off. He just stared, asking who she was. His mind raced, trying to figure out what she was. An enemy, another player, or just an NPC. He cautiously told her his name was Lee Ho-jae. The girl just giggled, repeating his name like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Ho-jae was getting seriously annoyed. This girl just wouldn't stop laughing at his name. Then, she suddenly got serious. She explained that she was the administrator for the hell difficulty. Ho-jae was confused. He had no idea there was such a thing. Kiri Kiri cheerfully explained that each difficulty had one. She told him that once a player clears the first floor, they get to meet their administrator. She congratulated him on making it through. As a reward, she said he now had access to the auction and store windows. She explained that the auction was only for certain areas, but the store could be opened anywhere. A glowing box appeared in front of him, and he hesitantly agreed to try it. He opened it and was shocked. The store sold everything: equipment, food, books, and even toys. Kiri Kiri smiled, telling him that now was the time to buy anything he needed, like weapons or clothes. Ho-jae was trying to figure out what to buy, going back and forth on his choices. Kiri Kiri just watched him with a big smile. Suddenly, she was right there, excitedly explaining all the items to him. Ho-jae was completely caught off guard. She even told him some of the gear wouldn't look good on him. He complained that she was being way too harsh. After a bit, he finally picked out an outfit. He looked pretty happy with himself, saying he finally felt like a normal person again. Kiri Kiri, on the other hand, was not impressed at all. She just stared at him, silently judging his choice of clothes. With the shopping done, Ho-jae's tone changed. He told Kiri Kiri he had something important to ask her. He asked what happens if you can't clear the first floor within 30 days. Kiri Kiri explained that all the food in your inventory just disappears. She then explained that her job was to give advice to the people who made it this far, but there was a limit to how much she could actually tell him. She continued, explaining that she could only give advice to people who had great potential or had accomplished amazing things. Then, with a little smile, she added that she also helps people she personally favors. Ho-jae immediately argued back, pointing out that she'd just been giving him shopping advice. She explained that simple item descriptions were allowed, but she cut him off, saying she couldn't answer big questions, and that was a one-time thing. She told him to stop talking, because she had one last important piece of advice for him. With a sudden urgency, she yelled her final tip. tip. He needed to buy recovery potions. A lot of them. As many as he could possibly get. The warning hit him hard. He stood there, processing what that could mean. He quickly put it together. Based on her advice, the theme for the second floor had to be recovery. But as she started to leave, he called out that he had one last thing he was curious about. Kiri just yelled back that she was done answering questions. But he had one last question, and it was a serious one. He needed to know what happened to the people who didn't make it out. Kiri immediately panicked. Her expression made it clear this was a question she wasn't allowed to answer. The silence that followed was heavy. She couldn't look him in the eye. Her silence was the only answer he was going to get. He finally broke the silence, telling her that he understood. He knew now there was no coming back for them. He changed the subject, thanking Kiri for her help with the shopping. She seemed a little surprised by the sudden shift. With a smile, he told her it was time for him to go. She gave him a thumbs up, ready to send him on his way. And just like that, he was gone from the waiting room. He stood ready, facing the portal to the second floor. Just as he was leaving, he heard Kiri call out his name one last time. She was cheering for him, wishing him good luck. But her final piece of advice was simple. Don't die. He couldn't help but laugh, thinking she was a funny one. With a final goodbye, he charged forward into the next stage. A system message popped up, welcoming him. A system message popped up, welcoming him. A system message popped up, welcoming him. It said he had about 43 hours left before the current round ended. He looked around, realizing the waiting room's features were the same as before. The system was ready when he was, asking if he wanted to proceed. He looked at the timer again. A thought crossed his mind. He had enough time to clear this floor before the round was even over. If he cleared 2 stages in a single round, there was a good chance he'd get a huge bonus reward. The idea was tempting. But then he remembered how easily things could go wrong. He decided to take it slow, clear the floor, and ask Kiri for advice later. He was about to get ready, but then he noticed something new in the room. It was a bed. After everything he'd been through, it was the best thing he'd ever seen. Without a second thought, he jumped right in. But his little nap turned into a deep sleep. He shot up in a panic, wondering how long he'd been out. He checked the timer. He had slept for 12 hours straight. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept that long. He sat there, thinking about how different he was now. This place had already changed him so much. He remembered his old life, wasting away in front of a computer. That person felt like a stranger now, but this feeling, it reminded him of his old days as a pro gamer. Back then, he would train like crazy, all for just one match. He had put everything on the line to win. Now, he was back in a game, but this time, the stakes were real. The thought settled in the quiet room. He shook his head. This was no time to get lost in thought. He pulled up his status window, and that's when he saw it. He had a new active skill. To be a passive skill that just worked on. Its own. Now it was active, and even better, it didn't cost any mana. This meant he could use it constantly, as long as his mind could handle the strain. A grin spread across his face. There was only one way to find out its limits. He decided to try it, right then and there. He took off running through the massive, empty hall. He started swinging the sword, practicing his form as he moved. His eyes narrowed. Everything else just faded away. He pushed himself to the absolute limit, swinging until he couldn't even stand properly. Finally, he collapsed onto the floor, completely out of breath. He gasped for air. Turns out, with his current mental strength, he could only keep battle focus active for about 5 minutes. Even that short burst left his head spinning. He realized mental exhaustion was way more dangerous than he thought. Pushing it any further could make him pass out. He figured that if he kept using it, his mental strength would grow along with his level. For now, though, he decided to check out the auction house. The auction was a marketplace where anyone who cleared the first floor could buy and sell. He realized mental exhaustion was way more dangerous than he thought. Pushing it any further could make him pass out. He figured that if he kept using it, his mental strength would grow along with his level. For now, though, he decided to check out the auction house. The auction was a marketplace where anyone who cleared the first floor could buy and sell items, no matter what difficulty they were on. He scrolled through the listings, but he wasn't impressed. Most of it was just basic starting gear, probably because everyone was still on the lower floors. He saw an item description for a cat collar. He couldn't believe someone would even list something so useless, calling it a reward. Seeing all this junk made him realize just how good his own reward, the protection of the wind spirit, really was. He was completely drained and started crawling toward his bed. He knew he'd gotten lucky, and he wasn't going to waste it. He found himself back in the waiting room, surrounded by white pillars. The second round was about to begin. The system announced that the second round was starting. He had about 72 hours or 3 days before the next tutorial began. He confirmed his timeline, 3 days in the waiting room, then 30 days for the tutorial itself. It was the same schedule as the first floor. He decided on his plan for the next 3 days. First, he'd work on improving his resistance skills. Then he'd check the community board for any useful information. He pulled up the community board. There were separate sections for each difficulty. He scanned the options, his focus sharp. The numbers told the story. Easy and normal had hundreds of posts. Hard had dozens. But the hell notice board, it barely had any. That was his world, almost completely alone. But then, something caught his eye. He froze. The number of people on the hell notice board, it had gone up. He wasn't the only one anymore. He stared at the numbers. The count for the Hell Notice board had increased. He wasn't the only one anymore. He checked the messages. The few people already there were freaking out, and one was already swearing at another. It seemed he wasn't the only one who noticed. He thought about the new players. They were probably in the lobby right now, completely lost and panicking, with no idea what was happening. He knew if he just left them in the dark, they would all die. He had to tell them what he knew about the first floor. He saw that they had logged on to the Hell Notice board. This was his chance. He quickly started typing a new post. He posted a message, asking any new players to comment. He promised to give them information they would desperately need to survive. But a moment later, they were gone. He screamed in frustration, wondering why they would just leave right after he offered to help. He decided to post the information anyway. Maybe they'd come back and read it. He just hoped they would understand that this wasn't some game. Their lives were on the line. With that done, he moved on to his next task, training his resistance skills. He took a breath, his expression hardening. Then he drove the sword right into his stomach. The blade hit hard, but it didn't go deep. He pulled the sword away, annoyed. It wasn't working. Turns out, you couldn't earn any experience in the lobby. That got him thinking about the lobby itself. He looked at the community board, annoyed. He was trying to give them life-saving advice, but they didn't believe him. They were already questioning if the sword and shield he recommended would even work. He decided to let it go. This was just the beginning, after all. A confident grin spread across his face. He was done waiting. He yelled out, telling the second floor to bring it on. He stepped through the portal. Instantly, he was on guard, shield up and ready. He smirked, wondering what this floor had in store for him. He found himself in a long, dark hallway. At the very end, another portal glowed, waiting. He recognized the hallway immediately. It was the exact same map as the first floor. He figured that kind of thing happens in games sometimes. He started walking, wondering if that meant the traps would be the same too. And just as he thought, arrows shot out from the walls, but he was completely ready for it. He deflected them without breaking a sweat, a grin spreading across his face. This was way too easy. With the first trap cleared, he started sprinting down the corridor, but then he heard a strange noise coming from behind him. He stopped, confused. A huge ball of light was speeding right at him. This was definitely not part of the first floor. He barely had time to react. The ball of light was coming in way too fast. He braced himself, raising his shield. The impact was huge. It shattered his shield instantly. The force of the blow sent him flying backwards. He stumbled, losing his balance completely. He couldn't understand what just happened, but it wasn't just the impact. He looked down at his hand and saw a small cut. Then he felt his legs start to give out. He realized with horror that the attack was poisoned. The poison was already spreading through his body. His vision blurred and he started to lose his grip. He was going down. His head was pounding and he felt sick. There was no doubt about it. The trap was laced with poison. Just as he was about to go down, he remembered the recovery potion Kirikiri had given him. He quickly pulled it out, thankful he had a way to survive this. He was about to drink it, but then he stopped. A strange thought crossed his mind. He looked down at the poison still coursing through him, then back at the potion. That's when a crazy idea hit him. What if he didn't cure it right away? What if he tried to endure it? He decided he was going to walk through this hallway until the poison wore off on its own. He forced himself forward, step by agonizing step. The poison was getting worse. He had to use his sword just to stay on his feet. But even then, he wondered if this crazy idea would actually work. Turns out, it did. After a solid month of enduring hell, he got something incredible, a special skill. He had earned a power all his own. He called it Styx Reader. And it wasn't just some normal skill you could buy. It was a power that only he could use. It allowed him to see how powerful an opponent was, based on how much damage they took. It was like getting a direct report from the Grim Reaper. He realized that every time he was close to dying, he'd have this weird vision of visiting his grandma. She'd be waiting for him by a river, telling him to take care before he left. That's how his new skill worked. He could measure how dangerous an enemy was by how deep he was standing in that river. If he ever crossed it completely, it meant he was gone for good. So he focused, trying to gauge just how bad the poison was. Where was he standing right now? After a moment, a grin spread across his face. This was nothing. He called it a good warm-up. With that settled, he put the recovery potion away. He decided he was going to save it for a real emergency. He leaned on what was left of his shield, his eyes fixed on the dark hallway ahead. Then he knelt down and carefully tied his shoelaces. He was ready to move. His crazy idea actually worked. A system message appeared in front of him. He had just acquired a level 1 anti-poison skill. He was ecstatic. This was exactly what he was hoping for. Enduring the pain had paid off. The effect was almost instant. He felt his strength returning and was able to stand up properly again. That's when he noticed what had actually hit him. The floor was covered in tiny, poison-tipped needles. Thinking they might be useful later, he knelt down and carefully started gathering them up. But as he was picking them up, a horrible thought suddenly struck him. He realized the trap wasn't just the needles. The poison was probably spreading through the air. He had to get back to the portal immediately. He didn't waste another second. He turned and sprinted back down the hallway. He finally made it back to the portal, panting heavily. Safety was just a few steps away. But then he stopped. He had the anti-poison skill now. He wondered, what if he stayed in the poison and pushed himself to the very edge to level it up? It was a crazy idea, but he decided to do it. He stood his ground, letting the poison wash over him. The feeling was intense, like being slowly submerged in water. His heart pounded in his chest, but his eyes were locked on the portal. He just had to wait for the right moment. He pushed himself further, right to the brink of collapse. At the last possible second, just as his body was about to give out, he lunged forward. He tumbled through the portal and found himself in a huge hall filled with pillars. He had made it. He collapsed onto the cold floor, completely drained. He pushed his body to its absolute limit, but he had survived. As he caught his breath, a system message appeared. His crazy stunt had actually worked. He'd just unlocked a level 1 anti-paralysis skill. He realized the paralysis was the real danger. It had almost stopped him from reaching the portal at the very last second, but that didn't scare him. It just meant he had another skill to level up. He got to his feet, a new plan already forming in his mind. He decided he would get the skill to level 3 by the end of the day. The only way to do that was to go back, get hurt, and recover. So he turned and walked right back toward the portal. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of going through that pain again was almost too much. It was just brutal. He started getting angry. In a normal game, you'd fight strong monsters to level up fast. But here, the only way was to just suffer through traps. He braced himself as the ball of light slammed into his shield again. He screamed out in frustration, calling it a trash game. The force of the blast was intense, but his shield held. He knew this was just the beginning of the grind, so he did it again and again. He ran back and forth, letting the trap hit him, recovering, and then doing it all over. Once he healed up, he'd step through the portal, resetting the whole trap. He got used to the arrow traps, but the poison and paralysis still hit hard every time. A small smile crept onto his face. He was actually getting somewhere. The shield wasn't perfect, and sometimes splinters would get through. He'd just pull them out and keep going. It hurt, obviously. Each little injury was a reminder of how real this all was, but then he'd feel it, the familiar tingling of the poison starting to spread. That was his cue. He knew the second floor was all about poison. He was determined to level up his tolerance skill as much as possible before he even thought about leaving. He knew this was the only way to level up quickly. Pain was just part of the process. He clenched his bleeding fist. This game wasn't normal at all, and for someone like him, that was the best news he could possibly get. He screamed in frustration. This whole system was garbage. Another arrow shot out from the wall. It slammed into him, and he cried out in pain. The pattern was easy, but he could feel the poison getting stronger each time. He knew that if he took too much, he'd just pass out. That's what made it almost impossible to raise his tolerance skill. But he kept going anyway, blocking the next volley with his shield. With blood on his face, he decided the second floor wasn't a big deal. It was just an empty hall filled with traps. He kept moving forward, walking down a long, dark hallway. But then he stopped. The air itself started to feel different. A thought started to form in his mind. He couldn't believe it. He was sweating. It was slow, but there was no doubt about it. The entire hallway began to glow. The temperature was rising fast. It was like walking into an oven. The heat was becoming unbearable. He quickly pulled out a water bottle. He poured it over his head, desperate for relief. He blocked another one, angry that he had. He blocked another one, angry that he had to dodge poison arrows in this furnace. That's when a message appeared. He'd just unlocked a level 1 heat resistance skill. Turns out, even the heat was just another stat to grind. He thought about going back to the lobby to recover, but realized it was too dangerous in this heat. The only way was forward. He steeled himself to push through. He remembered he had something that might help. He pulled out an ice potion. A wave of cold energy washed over him, pushing back the intense heat. With the potion's effect active, he started running down the hall. But a moment later, his relief vanished. The potion barely made a difference. The heat was just as bad as before. He was in serious trouble. It was no use. He was burning to death, and there was nothing he could do about it. Out of options, he pulled out a stamina potion. It was incredibly expensive, but he had no other choice. Just as he drank it, a message appeared. He'd just acquired level 2 burn resistance. The new skill was great, but it didn't stop the feeling of his skin actually burning. Distracted by the pain, he completely forgot about the arrow traps. One slammed into his back, and he hit the ground hard. He was at his limit. He knew if he took one more hit, it would all be over. His sword slipped from his hand. His strength was gone. He figured this was how he was going to go. But right at that moment, a system window appeared. He had leveled up his strength, agility, and all his resistances shot up. With the level up, all the pain was gone. His energy was back. He just lay there for a second, trying to understand what had just happened. Then it hit him. He hadn't just survived. He had actually leveled up. Another arrow trap went off, exploding right in front of him. This time, he was already moving. He was ecstatic. He'd actually leveled up. He could feel it. All his stamina was back, and the pain was completely gone. With this new strength, he knew he could clear the second floor in no time. He activated focus mode, and the world seemed to slow down around him. Then he used another skill, protection of the wind spirit. Green energy swirled, ready to block the next attack. He was filled with a new power. He shouted out, completely sure of himself. He was going to clear this floor, no matter what. He charged forward, roaring with newfound power, and in his rush, he tripped over his own feet. His eyes went wide with disbelief. He slammed face first into the brick wall. He sat there, stunned. Even with all his resistances, the pain was incredible. He couldn't believe it. He had to use his last healing potion for this. The thought of dying just from tripping was too embarrassing to even consider. Just then, a message popped up. It said the god of adventure pitied him. His face fell. He realized a god had seen the whole thing. Then, a new notification popped up. He'd gained a skill called natural recovery. The system explained that his body would now heal faster on its its own. That was a huge help. For a second, he thought about his parents, feeling like he'd finally made a little progress. But his moment of peace was cut short. He felt a sudden chill coming from the hallway ahead. He got to his feet and saw the air was misty and cold. It was an ice trap. After nearly dying in the last trap, he hesitated. He wondered if he should go back to the lobby and prepare properly this time. He decided to play it smart. Back in the waiting room, 19 days into the second round, he took a break to eat and plan. As he ate, he realized this tutorial world wasn't so different from the real one. There were good people, but there were also plenty of people who would do anything to get ahead. He scrolled through the community board, thinking about how most of the people in this tutorial were probably bad news. He worried that new players would fall for tricks and lies, and that a single mistake could cost them everything. That's when he saw something that made him stop cold. It was a post from another player. A rumor was spreading that if you could clear the 100th floor, you could go back home. The idea that there was a way out changed everything. He didn't know if it was true, but just the idea of it gave everyone hope. Still, the 100th floor felt a million miles away. He decided he'd worry about it when he got there. For now, his only goal was clearing the second floor. He charged back into the icy hallway, ready for a fight. A blast of freezing air hit him head on, and he grunted from the shock. Turns out, the system wouldn't let him buy any attack items after the round started. So instead, he'd bought fabric and a sewing kit to make his own defensive gear. The cold was brutal, but just like with the heat, the system gave him new skills to deal with it. Extended vision and skin strengthening. He gripped his shield and pushed forward down the endless, freezing hallway. The skills worked just like they sounded. He could see farther, and his skin felt tougher. He joked to himself that at this rate, he'd end up like Superman. But then he noticed something. His resistance skills weren't leveling up anymore. It seemed like he'd finally hit a limit, and the hallway was only getting colder. The temperature dropped so low that every breath felt like his lungs were being torn apart. He knew the real test was about to start. He activated his focus skill, ready for whatever came next. He stood his ground, waiting. His eyes were locked on the path ahead. He wasn't backing down. With one final push, he swung with everything he had left. He knew this was it. This floor was cleared. And just like that, a message appeared. The floor was cleared, and the ground disappeared beneath him. He landed in a huge, empty chamber, surrounded by giant stone pillars. He took a moment, looking at the glowing spot where he'd just appeared. Then he looked up, and it hit him. He was in the final boss room. In front of him stood a massive, sealed gate. It stretched from the floor to the ceiling, promising a serious fight on the other side. He stepped through a bright doorway and into the next chamber. He looked up, completely stunned. The room was huge, with a ceiling so high it felt like the sky. He couldn't believe the size of the place. But before he could even process it all, a system window appeared right in front of him. He stared at the words, completely confused. Return to the lobby? Then it hit him. This wasn't a trap or a trick. He actually had a choice to leave. The system laid out the next trial. He just had to stay in this room for 3 hours. The countdown had already started. He couldn't believe it. Just stay put for 3 hours? It sounded way too simple. But then he thought about all the traps he'd just survived to get here. He knew this trial was going to be anything but easy. That portal to go back was tempting for a second, but he'd already gotten everything he could from the lobby. There was no point in turning back now. He dismissed the option, ready to face whatever was coming. The trial started. He stood ready with his sword and shield, waiting for the first move. A new message appeared. The goal wasn't just to wait. It was to endure his most painful moments. He had no idea what that was supposed to mean. Suddenly, he felt a sharp jolt. Something was wrong. Out of nowhere, 2 arrows slammed into his body. He let out a scream of pure agony. He had no idea where the attack came from. He hadn't sensed a thing. The pain was unbelievable. For some reason, his pain resistance skill wasn't working at all. He looked down and noticed something else was wrong. He was holding his old starting weapon. That's when it all clicked. This wasn't real. It was a hallucination. But the pain, the smell of blood, it all felt so real he could barely tell the difference. He realized he'd have to endure this for 3 straight hours. And just like that, the world around him changed completely. The world twisted around him, and a new memory started to play. He was horrified. He was back in middle school, standing in an empty classroom. He knew exactly what was about to happen. His younger self pointed at a girl and declared that she was his favorite person in the world, and it was her destiny to date him. The girl just stared back, completely stunned, and told him she wasn't interested. Even now, just reliving it was the most embarrassing moment of his entire life. He couldn't believe it. Out of all the painful memories the system could have used, it chose this one. A message popped up from the god of adventure, taking pity on him. He was getting frantic, wondering how much longer this would last, but he couldn't check the time. Suddenly, the classroom vanished, and he was falling through an empty, dark space. The hallucination shifted again, this time to another part of his past. He was back in his pro gaming days. A rival was praising him in an interview, but it was just a setup. He said all of Hojai's achievements happened before he came along. The guy promised to prove that hard work beats talent. Hojai just wanted the memory to stop, but it didn't. He had to relive the crushing defeat all over again as the announcer declared his complete loss. The crowd was ruthless. They said he was totally dominated and should just retire. He just sat there, completely broken. The memory was so vivid, he could feel the air leave his lungs. His rival stood over him, telling him to just give up and retire. Then he called him Sunbae, a word for a senior, with a twisted, mocking laugh. It was the ultimate humiliation. He screamed, trying to shut out the memory. He gasped for air, wondering when the pain would finally stop. He knew this wouldn't actually kill him. It was just an illusion designed to break his will. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. This place was its own kind of hell. The memory shifted again, this time to something far worse. He was sitting in a quiet, empty room, dressed in black. A voice cut through the silence, telling him his father's death was his fault. He saw his father's face, just like it was in the picture at the funeral. Then he heard his father's voice call out his name. Suddenly, the illusion shattered. He was back in the real world, screaming. He hit the ground hard, completely disoriented. An unbelievable pain shot through his chest, so bad he clawed at his shirt. He let out a final, agonizing scream. He was at his limit. First his failures, and now a memory of his father. He felt like he was going to lose his mind, but he couldn't deny the truth in it. He really did feel responsible for what happened to his dad. As soon as he admitted it to himself, the world fell away beneath him. The darkness gave way to a bright, quiet room. He was younger in this memory, walking into a hospital room. He saw himself sitting beside his father's bed. A weak voice came from the bed, acknowledging that he was there. Hojay looked up, surprised. He was face to face with his father again. His father asked how he was doing, his voice weak. Then he got straight to the point, asking if it wasn't time for Hojay to stop. He told him to get a proper job, questioning if he was just going to play games for the rest of his life. Hojay was tired of hearing it. It was always the same conversation. His father said he'd played around long enough and needed to think about marriage. That was it. Hojay exploded, yelling that his dad didn't know the first thing about being a pro gamer. He screamed about how much effort he'd put in, saying his father had no idea how tough it really was. His father tried to respond, but he just clutched his chest, struggling to breathe. He finally had enough. He yelled that his father wasn't even trying to understand and turned to leave. But as he walked out, his father's voice stopped him. He asked who Hojay thought was paying for all the hospital bills. The old man was clearly in pain, struggling to even speak as he told his son to wait. Hojay turned back, his face still full of anger, and told him that he was the one paying for everything. His father could only whisper his name one last time before he collapsed onto the bed. The memory shattered, and he was back in the present, gasping for air. He screamed, grabbing at his shirt. He was at his limit. The memories were tearing him apart, because that argument was the last time he ever saw his father alive. The hallucination forced him to see the end result, the funeral. The guilt was crushing. The memory shifted to the funeral. A woman's voice cut through the silence, telling him she heard how he'd screamed at his father. She reminded him that his father's heart was weak, and then she said it plainly. It was his fault. Her words echoed in the empty room. His father was gone because of him. The guilt felt like an ocean, pulling him down into the darkness. He finally admitted it to himself. It was his fault. He never even tried to understand his father. He felt himself falling, completely lost in a swamp of his worst memories. The pain and regret were about to swallow him whole. But then, something inside him refused to break. He wasn't that person anymore. He gritted his teeth and decided he would not give up. He plunged through the darkness, ready for whatever came next. He screamed at the illusion, daring it to try again. The voices from his past echoed one last time, telling him it was all his fault. But something inside him snapped. He screamed that he could handle any physical pain. He swore he'd find a way out of this nightmare, no matter what they threw at him. And just like that, it was over. He was back in the boss room, lying on the cold floor, gasping for air. He looked up, his heart still pounding. The illusion was gone. That's when a message from the system appeared. It congratulated him for being the first person to ever fully clear the second floor's boss room. He could barely believe it. The ordeal was finally over. He wondered what first to fully clear even meant. Then another message appeared from a god who was curious about him. Suddenly, dozens of messages from other gods started flooding his screen. He just stared, completely lost. He had no idea what was going on. He was still trying to process all the messages from the gods. Because of his skilled playing, he was being offered. He stood there, trying to figure out what an authority even was. It sounded way more important than a regular skill, but he had no idea what it actually did. He didn't know what he was getting into. But a gift from a god wasn't something you turned down. He accepted the offer. 2 messages appeared. The first told him he'd gotten a new skill, Flicking Orb, already at max level. The second message explained it was a gift from the goddess of slowness, given to those she might want as a disciple. This just made him more confused. A max level skill with no explanation? And what did it mean to be a disciple of a god? Before he could even think about it, another message popped up. This one was different. It said the god of adventure was upset. He couldn't figure out why another god would be angry about him getting a gift. The only person who might have answers was Kirikiri. A glowing portal opened up in front of him, leading to the waiting area. He stepped through, letting out a sigh of relief. He was finally out of that boss room. He was finally back in the waiting area. A voice welcomed him, and a small green light appeared in the distance. Before he could even react, Kirikiri slammed into him with a huge hug. He yelled out in shock, completely caught off guard. She just laughed, happy to see him again. He was so surprised he could barely get a word out. She cheerfully congratulated him for surviving the second floor, acting like it was no big deal. But Hojay wasn't listening. He had an idea. He told her to stay put for a second. He quickly opened the system store and made a purchase. A moment later, he held out a huge strawberry cake, telling her it was for her. Kirikiri just stared at the cake, completely stunned. She was so excited she could barely speak, asking if it was really for her. She had to tell herself to calm down. Hojie just told her it was a thank you gift for all the things she'd taught him. She was absolutely beaming, telling him not to make such a serious face. She completely lost it, flying around and shouting that he was the best. Hojie just yelled at her to get a grip. A little while later, they sat down to eat. With the cake successfully delivered, Hojie got straight to the point. He asked her for tips on how to clear the third floor. While taking a big bite, she just smiled and told him there was no such thing. He argued that since she helped him with the second floor, she must have some tips for the third one too. But Kirikiri told him there weren't any. The problem was that he'd leveled up too quickly. She said even if she did something, it wouldn't actually help him. He was stunned. He'd never considered that being too strong could be a problem. He quickly changed the subject, asking about the people who had returned in the second round. He needed to know if they were still alive. Kirikiri stopped him. She warned him that to get that answer, he'd have to use up all of his remaining questions. That caught him off guard. He remembered she'd mentioned a limit. If he asked this, he couldn't ask anything else. She confirmed it was true. He thought it over. Knowing about the others wasn't worth losing all his questions. He decided to ask something else. So, he asked her to tell him about the flickering orb skill. He turned to ask about the skill, but she was gone. He looked around, wondering where she'd vanished to. Turns out, she was just running through a field, chasing a butterfly. He yelled at her to come back and finish explaining before she went off to play. She let out a sigh, complaining that she was too nice. She agreed to tell him, but only because he was so desperate. He immediately denied it. Kirikiri finally started to explain. The blink emblem was a power that belonged to the goddess of slowness. She said that sometimes challengers who perform really well get gifts from the gods. Hojie asked if it meant the goddess actually liked him. Kirikiri said it was likely, then added something important. Kirikiri finally started to explain. The blink emblem was a power that belonged to the goddess of slowness. She said that sometimes challengers who perform really well get gifts from the gods. Hojie asked if that meant the goddess actually liked him. Kirikiri said it was likely, then added something important. Each god only gets one chance to give away their power. That really got his attention. The goddess of slowness had used her one and only opportunity on him. A grin spread across his face. He was definitely liking this. Shaking off the excitement, he got back to the point. He needed to know exactly what this emblem did, and he asked her to be as detailed as possible. He glanced over at her. It was still hard to believe this playful kid was the manager for Hell difficulty. At first glance, she didn't look strong at all. He remembered hearing about a player who once attacked a manager. That player was completely overwhelmed. It made him realize Kirikiri must be a lot stronger than she looked. He decided to ask something bigger. He wanted to know what the gods really were. He pressed further, asking about their goals and what they expected from the players. Kirikiri's expression turned serious. She started to answer slowly. Then she told him he had to find the answer to that himself. He was taken aback by her response, but he just agreed. He could tell she really hated that question. He figured it was because he was asking about the very purpose of the game itself. He put the pieces together. The gods must have made this world and invited everyone to join. As part of that system, Kirikiri probably wasn't allowed to answer a question like that. Hojie knew this was just the second floor out of 100. It was barely the beginning, but he realized that the higher he climbed, the more he would understand this strange world. His resolve hardened. He was going to see this through to the end. Just as he was about to move on, Hojie remembered one last thing he needed to ask. He asked her about the system window he got after the boss fight, the one that said he'd fully cleared the room. He wanted to know exactly what that meant. Kirikiri just laughed and called it a design error. When he pushed for more details, she refused to say anything. She wouldn't answer any of his big questions. Not about the organizers. Not about getting home. She just playfully dodged every single one. He was getting seriously annoyed. It felt like she was being petty on purpose. Then, Kirikiri suddenly seemed to remember something important. She told him she had a gift for him. In a flash, his clothes changed. He was suddenly wearing a long black coat with bright yellow stripes. He looked down at himself, completely confused by what had just happened. He looked at the new coat, asking if he was really allowed to have it. Kirikiri just laughed, saying it was way better than his old sportswear. Hojie realized she must have really hated his clothes. As he got ready to leave, he told her she could have the rest of the cake. Her eyes lit up at the offer. He even promised to buy her another one soon. With a final grin, he said his goodbyes. Kirikiri waved back, looking pleased. He found himself alone in a huge hall with massive pillars. He was now in the third floor lobby. Before starting, he decided to check his skills. The system explained that his flash skill was a gift from the goddess of slowness. It would let him travel through time and space in the blink of an eye. He thought it was strange. A skill for moving fast didn't seem to fit the goddess of slowness, but he knew a skill like that could be incredibly useful. He decided to give it a try right then and there. He took a ready stance in the middle of the huge hall. A golden path lit up on the floor in front of him. He pushed off the ground hard, focusing his energy. He called on the flash skill. In an instant, he shot across the hall, landing in a crackle of blue energy. He couldn't believe it. To cover that much distance in a split second, it was basically teleportation. He felt a rush of power. This wasn't just speed. It felt like he was bending the rules of the world itself. He couldn't help but grin. In any game he'd ever played, a skill this good would have been nerfed into the ground. He started practicing, counting his steps as he zipped around. But he got a little too excited and tripped, smacking face first into one of the pillars. He lay there, completely stunned. Of all things, he'd tripped over his own bed. He made a mental note to start paying more attention. With his practice time over, he sat down and pulled up the system menu. It was time to get ready for the next floor. First things first, he needed supplies. Potions, food, and water were top of the list, followed by some new weapons. He decided to replace his current sword and get a new set of armor. But before buying anything, he wanted to check his skills one last time. He stopped. A detailed explanation had been added to one of his skills. He had a pretty good idea who was behind it. He realized this new skill was so powerful, it could become his main focus from now on. He decided to use his remaining time to practice controlling his power. But just as he was about to start, something appeared in front of him. It was a message icon, glowing brightly. His mind raced. Who could possibly be sending him a message? He wondered if there was another player in Hell difficulty after all. He reached out and tapped the icon to open it. The message was an invitation to something called the Union of Representatives. He stared at the words, completely confused. And Union of Representatives? He had no idea what that meant. The invitation was for something called the Guild of Representatives. Hojay had no idea what that was. A guild? Here? He read the full message. It was from someone who was amazed by his progress on Hell difficulty. The person wanted to explain what the guild was all about. It ended by saying they would wait for his reply, and was signed by someone named Lee Chang-seok. Hojay thought about it. He knew the community had been more active, but he never expected a group like this to form already. He'd never seen the name Lee Chang-seok on any of the top ranker leaderboards. Besides, he was the only one on Hell difficulty, so he never needed to talk to anyone else. He decided to put the message aside for now. It was time to get ready for the third floor. He still had way too much to do to get distracted. He shook his head. He had a long way to go to reach the 100th floor, and he couldn't afford any distractions. With his mindset, he stepped onto the third floor of the tutorial. The entire room was a giant checkerboard, floating over what looked like lava. He didn't wait around. He leaped right onto the board, sword and shield ready. He started moving across the tiles, testing his footing. He purposely stepped onto one of the black squares. Just as he thought, a trap went off instantly. A grin spread across his face. He knew it. The traps were set on the black tiles. That meant the white squares were the safe zones. The path forward was clear. He started moving quickly, sticking only to the white squares. But then he stopped. Something felt off. He knelt down, thinking it through. The white tiles were safe, but a bad feeling crept in. This was Hell difficulty. It was never supposed to be this easy. He knew the simple pattern had to be a trick. He immediately pulled up his skill list. He scanned through them, looking for the right one to have on standby. It was time to move. He slammed his hand on, was time to move. He slammed his hand on the ground and pushed off with all his strength. He felt a rush of excitement. This was going well. He was sure he could clear this floor. No problem. He leaped across the last few squares, his sword scraping the ground as he landed. And that's when it happened. Arrows shot out from the walls, flying right at him. He didn't hesitate. He activated Flash, disappearing in a crackle of blue energy just as the arrows were about to hit. He reappeared a safe distance away, sweating. That was way too close. Without his skill, he would have been turned into a pincushion. He finally understood. They baited him into thinking the white tiles were safe, only to unleash the real trap on the very last step. It was a dirty trick. With the trap room behind him, Lee Hojay walked down the long checkered hall towards the light. He entered a massive chamber with huge pillars. In the middle of the room, a strange blue pit glowed with energy. He was already at the boss room. He thought to himself that for Hell difficulty, this was almost disappointingly easy, wondering if it was just a resting spot. He walked across the stone floor towards the huge metal doors. Since he hadn't learned any new skills here, he figured there was no real need to go back to the lobby. He decided to just get it over with quickly and reached out to open the door. A confident smirk spread across his face. His eyes narrowed. He was ready. But when he stepped through the door, it wasn't a boss room at all. He found himself in a huge, misty space filled with tall, floating rocks. He walked forward, completely on guard. He knew this peaceful place had to be some kind of trick, and he was ready for whatever it was.